welcome, brave souls, to the realm of the unknown. Here, shadows come to life, and whispers in the dark reveal the secrets of forgotten tales. Gather round and prepare to be immersed in the spine-chilling stories that will haunt your dreams and awaken your deepest fears. This is your sanctuary of suspense. Welcome to the Haunted Narrator.
In East Tennessee, nestled deep in the shadows of the Great Smoky portion of the Appalachian Mountains, lies the tiny, sleepy, and all but forgotten town of Coldwater Springs. Once a promising tourist destination, the town thrived for a couple of decades due to its scenic geography and proximity to growing areas like Johnson City and Knoxville. However, old money and new highways redirected southward to places like Gatlinburg and Pigeon Forge, leaving Coldwater Springs behind. Overnight, it became a ghost town, just another empty mountain hollow among countless others stretching out for hundreds of miles. For me, however, this forsaken place was the perfect destination for my yearly solo getaway. As a single man in my late 20s with highly introverted needs, renting a cabin in Coldwater Springs and disappearing for a few days seemed ideal for distressing and realigning myself. After saving up my time off and tapping into my vacation account, I made the 4-hour trip from Nashville to the foothills and monstrous mountains of East Tennessee, leaving early enough to arrive before sunset. I found a cabin for an absolute steal a few miles outside of Coldwater Springs. Blasting my classic country road trip playlist, I finally relaxed, floating on the voice of Lefty Frizzell as I turned off a long, lonely highway onto a not as long but twice as lonely gravel road. Now this is more like it, I said to myself. Although the sun was still high, shadows poured over the mountaintops and onto everything within view as the gravel road snaked between the towering giants. For at least 2 miles, I didn't see a single house or power line. I began to wonder if I had turned onto the correct county road, and a small voice within me questioned whether I was being led out here to become another mysterious Appalachian statistic. I laughed it off, given that the blue line of my GPS still pointed forward and seemed to be nearing its end. "You're here to chill, buddy. Just enjoy yourself," I whispered to my rearview reflection. Finally, I saw electric lights and 3 mailboxes as I reached the end of the gravel road. I recognized the address of my cabin, the center and furthest residence. I looked around at my temporary neighbors. To my right, darkness and no signs of human activity. My host had mentioned online that 2 of the 3 cabins were year-round rentals, and the other was owned by a sweet, elderly widow known for sharing produce from her huge garden. Glancing up the mountain, I saw porch lights from her home a few hundred feet away. Pleased with the truthfulness of the listing, I began up my rented driveway. About a quarter-mile uphill, I was greeted by my own set of porch lights shining from a beautiful little cabin. A green roof, painted dark brown logs, and electricity. My needs were simple but essential. Despite the late afternoon shadows covering most of the vista, I could already tell the place was even more beautiful than the pictures suggested. I parked, grabbed my bags, and walked up the porch steps and through the front door. It was a 1-bed, 1-bath dream house. The smell of pine washed over me, and the lodge decor stole my heart. A deerskin lamp had already been turned on, splashing warm light over the interior. To my right was my bed, with a wooden frame and a stitched quilt covered in brown bears. To my left was a kitchen area, with several Appalachian cookbooks on the counter. The walls were adorned with game and fish trophies of all kinds, from elk to largemouth bass. There was no TV and no Wi-Fi, which was fine by me. I had brought a stack of novels to devour during my week-long stay. Having unpacked and settled in, I strolled out the front door onto the string-lit porch. The night was cool and growing ever dark. The white noise of the deep forest was rich, with a chorus of nocturnal creatures singing out full-voiced, celebrating another evening of life. I looked across the hollow and could clearly see my neighbor's well-lit home against the shadows of the heights. Much to my surprise, she was standing on her porch, looking over at me. I couldn't make out many features given the backlighting, save for her silhouette, with white hair visible like a crown on her small, dark frame. She stood as still as the pines that surrounded her home. With exaggerated movement, I gave her a big wave, letting her know I was supposed to be here, just another tenant in search of a few beautiful days of escapism in her neck of the woods. She didn't return the gesture, staying perfectly still on the corner of her dimly lit porch. Maybe she can't see me, I thought to myself. Feeling the need to introduce myself, I decided to call my host and get a number for her house. Luckily, there was a landline phone in my cabin, and I had the man's number saved. He answered after a couple of rings. I let him know I had arrived safely, was pleased with the place, and mentioned seeing the neighbor and wanting to introduce myself. "Oh, you saw Mrs. Brookline? That's good to hear. Haven't heard from her in a few weeks and was starting to worry. I haven't had any other renters in a while and haven't made my way there either in a hot minute." He gave me her number and I thanked him. Ending the call, I dialed her up and held the phone to my ear as I walked back out onto the porch, waiting for an answer. Looking back toward her house, I was almost shocked to see all the lights had gone dark. I couldn't see a thing, much less any signs of a wakeful human. The phone rang and rang with no answer and no voicemail. "Must have gone to bed," I whispered to myself. Not thinking too much of it, I returned to settling in and enjoying my evening. Within 10 minutes, I was posted in a comfortable chair on the porch in the cool night air, several pages into a mystery novel and several sips into a glass of Cabernet. This was just what my tired soul longed for. My senses were all satisfied, and the comforting music of the woods at night wrapped it all together with a bow. After a while, my eyes grew heavy from a long day of traveling, and I leaned my head back in a moment of blissful surrender. I jolted awake after what could have been a couple of minutes or several hours. Something was wrong. Something seemed off. In my disorientation, I realized the peaceful sounds that had lulled me to sleep were gone. The woods around me were dead silent, like the night had quickly drawn and held its breath. I instinctively held mine too, to sharpen my hearing given the strange and sudden situation. I sat there for several minutes, book still in hand, completely still and quiet, anxiously needing an answer for this strange muting of nature. Suddenly, from a couple of 100 feet down in the dark hollow below, I heard movement. The brush rustled, sharply cutting through the silence. Birds scattered from the tops of trees above the noise. From my point of view, it seemed to be moving left to right, coming no closer but going no further from me. I was laser focused, trying to get a blind read on what it could be. The rustling stopped. I remained frozen in my chair, unblinking, staring out into the night. As my eyes adjusted to the dark, I made out a large shape down where the noises were coming from. Although distinct features were lost in the poor light, I saw the outline of a huge animal. It towered above the brush, maybe 10 feet tall and several feet wide. It was barely moving, slightly swaying. Whatever it was, it knew I was there. After another few moments of silence, the large shadow sunk down to the forest floor and rustled further down the hollow away from me. Though possibly delirious, I could have sworn I heard a whistle. A low, slow, human-like whistle. The animal kept moving away until it was out of earshot. A couple of minutes later, the night resumed its orchestra, and all the insects and frogs began to sing again, the mysterious danger having left. After a long moment of relief and disbelief, I finally gathered the courage to slowly stand up and creep back into the cabin. I locked the door behind me, breathing heavily. I walked over to the window, my mind racing. What was that thing? My first thought was a bear. This is black bear country after all. Yeah, that had to be it. Black bears usually aren't much of a threat to those of us who aren't unsealed garbage cans. Yeah, that's what it was. Easily explainable. I kept reassuring myself, although in the back of my mind I knew that what I saw was way larger than a typical black bear. I reminded myself that my eyesight was skewed, making shadows stretch and making objects appear bigger than they actually are. I began to calm down as logic seeped into my anxious mind like strong medicine. Okay, we're good. We're fine, I told myself out loud. I made sure the door was locked tight and that all the windows were shut snugly. I kept the porch lights on and lit a candle by my bedside, further comforting myself and reminding me where I am and why I'm here in the first place. I sat on my bed, book in hand, ready to resume my reading. Before I began, I scanned the inside of the cabin once more and glanced outside. Looking to my right through the kitchen window, I noticed a dim light across the hollow, once again coming from the neighbor's house, owned by Mrs. Brookline. I stood up and walked across the room. putting my hands on the window pane and leaning over the sink to get a better view. My skin began to crawl, and I felt my heartbeat accelerating. The light was not from the porch this time, but from inside the house. From a wide window, I could see the dark, unmoving outline of the elderly woman facing toward me. She had turned on a lamp and just seemed to be staring toward my cabin. I still couldn't distinguish many features about her, but under her snowy hair, I could see her eyes wide open as if out of pure terror. They were almost glowing. This startled me as my own eyes widened out of fearful instinct. After not even 10 seconds of this long-distance staring contest, the old lady's lamp was extinguished, and her cabin was once again drowned in total darkness. I blinked hard several times and backed off the sink. Seeing curtains on the window's edge, I pulled them tight, cursing myself for not noticing them earlier. I did the same to every other window in my cabin. I went back and sat on my bed, bewildered and tired. What a strange night. No, it's all good. Everything is explainable, I reassured myself. Tomorrow I'll go introduce myself to her and probably love her instantly. This will be great. And that animal was probably just a little black bear. Just gotta keep my powder dry and make sure there's no trash left out. Feeling a little better after my pep talk and thinking realistically, I finally unwound into the world of my book and ultimately into the world of dreams. I slept through the night and woke up around 9 a.m. when the morning beams finally found their way down the mountainside to the hollow. I stretched and yawned, feeling refreshed after a surprisingly good night's rest. The night before felt like a weird dream, but in the light of day, it all seemed a lot less scary and strange. I was excited even. Today I would spend some time exploring the land around my cabin. It sat on dozens of acres, with trails, ponds, and creeks all around. But first, I would go meet Mrs. Vera Klein and hopefully develop a good rapport, maybe even a lifelong friend. I also needed some groceries and other items from town, and I was looking forward to seeing Coldwater Springs in all of its overlooked glory. Yes, the day was planned. I started a pot of coffee and took a shower. After cleaning up, I got dressed, caffeinated, and was out the door. I cranked the car and began heading down my driveway over to Mrs. Sophia Klein's place. I parked by her mailbox and started walking the long driveway uphill. I didn't see a car, but there was a closed separate garage, so I assumed it was in there. Her cabin was very similar to mine, maybe a little bigger. The porch was definitely bigger, with large rock steps leading to it from her gravel driveway. On the left side of her house was her garden, which was supposed to be popular. It was huge. However, upon nearing it, I noticed that the vegetables looked anything but healthy. Weeds had all but overtaken the entire thing. As if I could do any better, I thought to myself, not wanting to judge. I made my way across the rock steps and up onto her porch. A large stack of letters and packages were strewn around on her doormat, which displayed in large text the words, "You made it." My brow raised after seeing all the unopened mail so haphazardly left about. Oh well, I was just there to shake hands and explain myself. I knocked 3 times on the front door. I waited, listening for any stirring. After about 20 seconds of silence, I knocked again, this time a little louder. Ouch. It hurt my knuckles to knock hard on her door. That was odd, given everything was made out of pine. It had no give though, and was hard as stone. It wasn't until I noticed the slim windows on each side of the door that I realized why it was so firm. 2x4 boards lined up over the door from the inside, completely sealing it shut. "What the?" I said aloud, jostling the locked doorknob. I walked over to the wide window to the right of the door, the one I had seen her looking out of just hours before. "No," I whispered. It was completely boarded up as well, with not even a centimeter of space to peer inside. This could not be real. I walked around the entire cabin, looking for any door or window that may have been open. They were all nailed shut, leaving the cabin completely entombed. I ran to the separate garage and tried to open the sliding door. It was open. I pulled it all the way up and looked inside. There sat a dusty old Z71, but it looked like it was in good shape. That gave me a little relief. I still had no explanation for the house being boarded, given I had literally seen her in her open window the night before. I drove back to my cabin and dialed my host. He answered, and I told him everything. Okay, that's a little weird, but I'm sure it's all fine. A few months ago, she mentioned maybe moving over to Asheville to live with her younger sister. Figured she would have let me know, but hey, that's neither here nor there. She's a grown woman. Go ahead and go about your day, and just to be safe, I'll get the sheriff out there for a wellness check. I thanked him and hung up. Hopefully by the end of the day, I'd have more information about her whereabouts. I got back in my car and took off down the long gravel road, back towards civilization. Turning back onto the highway, I rolled my windows down, taking in the scenic Appalachian views and fresh air. It truly felt like I was in another world, a world of peace and striking beauty. The highway twisted and turned through towering mountains and past roaring rivers. After about 20 minutes, I came upon Coldwater Springs proper. I drove around the old town square, which surrounded an age-old courthouse. Most buildings were condemned and desolate. I did, however, see a small country grocery on one corner. I parked and walked in to find a charming old market. I gathered a few items and proceeded to be checked out by a smiling, middle-aged woman with reading glasses around her neck and a red apron around her waist. "Well, where are you from, handsome?" she sweetly asked. I laughed politely and told her I was from Nashville and was staying a few days out in a cabin off of Highway 67, about 20 miles north. "Oh my, you're really out of your way, huh?" she replied, her eyes narrowing. She paused for a brief moment, glancing down quickly and then back up. "Well, I hope you enjoy your stay. You know, out there where you are, they call those the Singing Mountains." Slightly taken aback by her reaction to where I was staying, I asked why they call them by that name. "It's because when the wind rolls through those hollers, it sounds like a choir singing," she said with an intermittently silver-toothed smile that I hadn't noticed before. I returned a smile at the explanation, satisfied. I asked her if there was anywhere to get a bite to eat in the area, as I was starving and didn't plan on being home for a while longer. "Oh yeah, you're gonna want to try the Coldwater Duck Inn just down the road. Best burger and catfish in town," she answered, as she finished ringing me up. That sounded really good, so I thanked her, grabbed my bags, and walked back out to my car. With a bit of cell signal, I plugged in the restaurant on my GPS and away I went. Not even 10 minutes down the road past the town square, I pulled up to a humble little dive with the name Coldwater Duck Inn. A little shack of a place, it had plenty of cars and motorcycles parked out front, and neon signs boasted about having the best burgers and coldest beer in town. This worked for me. I walked through the front door into a quaint bar and grill, complete with pool tables, televisions, and even an old-school cigarette vending machine. Several groups were already enjoying their meals. I got a few looks as I cozied up to the bar shyly. I'm sure they weren't used to seeing new faces around here. "Hey friend, what can I get you started with?" A 40-something man with dark hair and tired eyes asked me. After glancing at the menu for a second, I asked for a light draft beer and a regular cheeseburger with fries. "Good choice, you'll love it. Where are you in from? Don't think I've seen your face before." I told him my story and where I was staying, laughing as I mentioned how the lady at the grocery store referred to the area as the Singing Mountains. His face fell. "Singing Mountains, huh?" A slight hush fell over a couple of tables close enough to hear our conversation. "How's it been out there?" he asked. The reaction of the man and the people around us made me nervous, but I answered honestly. I mentioned the animal situation from the night before and asked if there were a lot of black bears in that area. He leaned in close, his voice low and soft. "There's a lot more than bears out there in those woods, son," he told me sternly before walking away to the kitchen. After an anxious few minutes nursing my beer, he returned with my burger, which looked amazing. I thanked him and dug in, cleaning my plate in less than half an inning of a college baseball game on the bar TV. I stood up to pay, but he refused. "On me, son. But if I can offer you a word of advice, I'd stay inside after sunset over where you are. It can be dangerous." "Now come back and see us," he said, giving me a small grin and a quick nod. I thanked him, too anxious to ask why I should stay indoors at night. I was also too scared to mention the whistling I heard from the unidentified beast in the forest, which I had forgotten to bring up. I got back in my car and spent the early afternoon driving around the area. I stopped and walked a trail at a local state park, saw a waterfall, and took tons of pictures. It was truly paradise. I felt so far removed from my daily troubles back in the city. I even began to forget the strange warnings the bartender had given me and the odd events at my cabin. I wanted to get back with enough daylight to explore the land around my cabin, so I ended up back past the town square and onto the northbound highway toward the Singing Mountains. Once again, I was lost in the heart of true country music as I got back onto the gravel road. Fields flew by as I made my way back near the end of the drive. Smiling and breathing deeply, I noticed a commotion up ahead where the road ended. There was a sheriff's truck, two police cars, and a white unmarked SUV parked outside Mrs. Klein's house. The SUV was pulling out of her driveway and rolled down the road, passing me. The men driving had gaunt faces and shot me hardened looks as they went by. What was going on? I continued past them and rolled to a stop by Mrs. Klein's mailbox. A man in a tan uniform was on her porch talking to a couple of officers. I assumed he was the sheriff. Next to them was the front door, gaping, having been breached with force. I clenched my jaw at the sight. The sheriff noticed me and shot looks at the officers before returning his gaze my way. Alone, he walked down the porch stairs and into his truck, which he then backed down the steep driveway over to me. He got out and walked toward my window, which I rolled down with haste. "Afternoon. You the fella staying over at Jeff's place?" he asked. In my poor memory, I hadn't even registered that my host's name was Jeff, so I stared at the sheriff in a moment of confusion before answering yes. "Well, he called me to come visit Mrs. Klein on your behalf, I believe. Is this right?" I nodded. "Well, I've since called him back as well, but I figure you should know too, since you're the reason I'm out here in the first place." He paused with a big breath. "Mrs. Klein has sadly passed. Now I don't suspect any foul play, so I don't need anything from you, but thought you should know." I was shocked. He could read it all over my face. I didn't know what to say. Finally, I found the energy to ask him what happened and about all the boards. "Not entirely sure, son." Mrs. Klein was a tender-hearted woman. She never caused any trouble and was always sweet and helpful to Jeff and his visitors. However, he paused again with another breath. She would sometimes act a little off, would rant to Jeff and myself and others about conspiracy bull and strange creatures and whatnot. Just her age, I reckon. Must have had an episode, boarded herself in so she'd be safe from all her delusions or whatever, and well, forgot to make a way out. I told him she was acting strange the night before, staring out her window at me and not answering her phone. I told him she must have boarded it all up in the early hours of the morning. He lowered his brow and looked at me like I had just spoken some alien language. "Son, the coroner just drove off with the body, and he says she's been dead for weeks, maybe even a couple of months." He paused. "Now I don't know what you're smoking over there, but I know Jeff wouldn't allow it, and I sure as hell don't allow it. So get on, keep your nose clean, and we'll be in touch if we need anything else," he said, tapping the top of my car and cursing under his breath. I drove slowly on past them and over to my driveway and up the hill, not even remotely registering what I had just been told. Blankly staring through my windshield, I fumbled for my keys and opened the door, using muscle memory to get out and walk up the stairs and into my cabin, where I more or less collapsed onto the bed. That simply had to be wrong. She had to have been alive last night. I know what I saw, right? I wasn't sure anymore. I sprang back up and rushed to the phone. I dialed Jeff but got no answer. I tried again. Nothing. I couldn't be in there anymore, not where I could look out the window, and in my mind's I see the dark figure standing, watching me in the low light from across the hollow. You've ventured through the shadows and faced the unknown. But remember, dear listener, the stories you hear tonight may follow you into your dreams. If you dare to return, subscribe, and join our community of thrill seekers. Leave your comments, share your fears, and hit the like button if you survive the journey. Until next time, sleep tight, and beware of what lurks in the darkness. This has been the Haunted Narrator. Good night.